Hey everyone, welcome to Zero Waste Management. My name is Kate and I'm going to be your lecturer. We start on Wednesday, the 4th of May, and we finish on Thursday, the 16th of June with your exam, by which time you'll all be experts in zero waste management and sustainable waste. So, what's this course all about? Well, ultimately, this course is about reducing the amount of materials that you use, which will end up reducing the amount of waste you create. The course is also about how you reuse materials. So once you've used something, what else can you turn it into and use it in another form? It's also about recycling whenever possible. It's also about rethinking the materials that you use and those that you throw away. It's also about rethinking how we produce materials in the first place so that they don't end up in the landfill. So another phrase for zero waste management is also sustainable waste management. The idea as well that waste should be retermed resource, that we shouldn't waste anything at all. We should reuse it and use it as a resource. And ultimately, the power lies with you, the consumer. Now, we're just going to run through a few learning tips so that you get the most out of this course. Did you know even if you have a good memory, you're going to forget at least a quarter of what you've learned on the day you learned it? Things you will remember? Well, you'll remember approximately 10% of what you read, 20% of what you hear, 30% of what you see, and 50% of what you see and hear. This is one of the reasons why I'm doing these audio slideshows, is to increase your retention of material and your enjoyment of material. It's quite interesting to think that if you were just going to read it, do you think that at the end of maybe 2 weeks, you would only be able to recall 10% of what you had read? And that seems to me a really low figure. So, as much as possible, trying to increase the amount that you remember and enjoy, because it's not just a question of remembering the material, but playing with ideas, creating new ideas. And that really comes not just from these passive ideas of reading and hearing and seeing, but from the more active ones. So you typically remember 70% of what you say. So if you say the information that's on these PowerPoints out loud, you're more likely to recall it a week or two later. And if you say and do the actions involved in this material, you'll remember more likely 90% of that material. And if you then go on to teach others this material, you're likely to remember up to 95% or even more of that material. Now, those others could be people in your household, they could be your peers, your friends. That action of teaching is very active. So anything you can do in an active learning sense will increase the amount that you're able to remember. And if you don't do something active with new information to move it from your short-term to your long-term memory, you'll forget it faster than last night's casserole. So some tips and strategies for reinforcing your learning. Reinforce only correct information. Choose what you want to put into your long-term memory. Now, that might seem really obvious, but for example, sometimes we can say things in a negative sense, and that might be retained. But if you can phrase things in a positive sense, then you're more likely to retain it in a correct way. Secondly, use as many senses as possible when learning something new. So if you can read it, see it, hear it, in a tactile sense, if you're able to touch it, so you're touching your recycling, touching your waste as you're thinking through these concepts, all of those strategies will help you to retain the information. Making new associations between old and new information and relating new information to something you already know or something you have already experienced. Making those linkages will help retain it better in your brain as well. Make the learning meaningful to you. Have a think as you're looking through the material or listening to the lecture material. How does it relate to you in your life or to you in your future career? And those associations again will help you to retain the information better and longer. Another strategy is to organize and chunk the information to be learned. And you can do that just in your own head, or you could do that visually and physically on paper by grouping the bits of information into those groups. So again, you're using the power of churning some information that you've learned from one form into another form. You're sort of redigesting it in a way. Another way is to use memory aids like stories or rhymes, graphic organizers or mind maps, mental pictures, flashcards, and mnemonic devices. And we'll go through some of these in class. And what the image is just showing you now, I'll leave you for 5 seconds to think, to give you a chance to think, what is that showing? All right, excellent for those of you who got it. So if you imagine your two hands clenched into fists, you can see your knuckles, and that's what the image is showing. Now, what have you got there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Should have 12 numbers there representing the 12 months of the year. So if you're trying to recall how many how many days are in each month of the year, you can just hold out your fists, and there you have, with the first one, you have January has 31. So all the peaks are 31. All your peaked knuckles have 31. And those represent January, March, May, July, August, October, and December. And then the troughs are the ones with either 28 in February's case or 30 as in the rest. So you've got January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December. So that's a fun way of remembering detail, and you can do that for all sorts of things. It's you're only really limited by your imagination. Anything is possible. Really useful strategy, which I'm sure you know, is to use it before you lose it. So teach or explain it to someone else. And you can explain it to yourself if you want. You can, it's the action of saying it out loud and rephrasing material that you've heard or read. Review the information just before going to bed. Your brain will keep reinforcing what you have learned while you sleep. And take advantage of spaced review. Have confidence that you will remember. The idea of spaced review really plays on the idea of primacy and recency. So you've got a better chance of remembering information learned at the beginning and at the end of a learning event or a review session. And that's what you'll see in newspapers. When you see a newspaper article, they know, the journalists, that the most important information has to be at the very start of the article and at the very end of the article, because your primacy, or the first thing you read, and your recency, or the last thing you read, are the critical details that you'll remember. Okay, so basic teaching philosophy that I like to follow is that you're more likely to remember information if you've been actively involved in creating it or putting it together. And so we like to move away from this teacher-centered learning where students are sitting passively receiving the information to a much more student-centered learning where you're actively involved in redigesting, regurgitating the information in different ways to help you learn it, but also to help create new combinations of information. This is just another example showing that learning pyramid about how you remember information or learn information best. So that in a lecture, you might learn 5% of the information, or you might recall after 1 or 2 weeks only 5% of a lecture where you're sitting passively just listening and watching. You might remember 10% of information that you read. You might remember 20% of the information that was on an audio visual like this. 30% of information in a demonstration, 50% when you're in a discussion group, and 75% if you practice by doing. So, for example, if we're learning about zero waste and it involves things like recycling, if you're actually doing some recycling at the time that you're thinking through the material, you are more likely to remember that material. And finally, 90%, or as we discussed before, up to 95% of information when you're teaching others, because you're having to rephrase it and present it in your own way. So that really is getting your brain working well. What does zero waste mean to you? Have a wee think about what you personally understand by that phrase, zero waste. And then have a look at this TED talk. TED is a fantastic resource that you can look up on. They have their own website and they have many YouTube clips for TED. TED stands for Technology, Education and Design. And it's been going around the world for many years now with a whole array of different subject matters. There's some great stuff on recycling and waste management. And this one is a teenager called Lauren Singer who can fit all the trash she has produced in 3 years into a single jam jar. It's only 13 minutes long. She explains what's inspired her mission. She was also an environmental student, and you can watch it by clicking the link. So there is a zero waste definition, which is that it's a goal that's ethical, economical, efficient, and visionary to guide people in changing their lifestyles and practices to emulate sustainable natural cycles where all discarded materials are designed to become resources for others to use. Zero waste means designing and managing those products and processes to systematically avoid and eliminate the volume and the toxicity of waste and materials, conserve and recover all resources, and not burn or bury them. Implementing zero waste will eliminate all discharges to land, water, or air that are a threat to planetary, human, animal, or plant health. And that was an internationally accepted, peer-reviewed definition that was adopted by the Zero Waste International Alliance in 2004. We look in many cases to nature to see how environmental management could be practiced. One example in nature, of course, is the um, degradation of material by bacteria. We look at vultures, the way they recycle carrion and turn it into product, which is their own body. And in so doing, they rid the environment of dead waste material that would otherwise turn putrid or harmful to the environment. So there are many, many examples where bacteria, fungi, animals recycle materials. And as they did with the aeroplane, mimicking the flight of birds, it's often very wise to turn to nature to look at what we can do. So anyway, this is a zero waste definition that's been accepted. And there we have the same definition on the left-hand side. So basically, zero waste is about maximizing recycling, trying to minimize the amount of waste that goes to landfill. So we're maximizing the recycling that we do for whether it's plastic or glass or tin cans, aluminium, etc. It's about minimizing residual waste, leftover waste, minimizing the amount of waste that's left over that needs to go into landfill. It's aiming to reduce consumption. The consumer, which is all of us, we have a tendency, an increasing tendency in the last few years, to increase the amount of things that we buy. And so those things have to go somewhere at the end of their life. Where do they go? If they can be recycled, that's great, although you have still produced an item or you've caused an item to be produced through purchasing it. So the idea about zero waste as a concept and as a movement is about trying to reduce people's desire to buy things, need to buy things, reduce that consumption urge. Zero waste is also about ensuring that products are made to be reused, repaired, recycled, or composted. That before they even turn up on the assembly line or the production factory, they are conceived in such a way that at that point in conception, the designer has an end point in mind that is not the landfill, but that is another product. And that's what they call cradle to cradle, as opposed to cradle to grave, where the cradle is the product being born or designed and produced, and then it ends up in the grave, which is the landfill. So zero waste also tries to ensure that we don't have the waste in the first place, that from the moment the item is conceived of, it's designed in such a way that it can be reused or repaired or composted. So the goal of zero waste is to minimize and ultimately eliminate waste. And of course, to reconsider that use of the word waste, instead to use the word resource. So what are the aims and objectives of this course? Well, the aim is to understand the zero waste management principles, the impact of solid waste on the environment, and you'll be dealing with wastewater with Phoebe. This course that I'll be teaching is focusing on solid waste, and to explore the concepts of resource efficiency and recycling initiatives. We've got two key objectives for this course. That following successful completion of the course, you'll be able to, firstly, describe waste management principles in a selected context, and secondly, that you'll be able to describe the application of legislative requirements for waste management. Let's just explore those two in detail. So, objective number one. By the end of this course, you'll be able to describe waste management principles in a selected context. And you'll be able to do this by describing the principles of waste management in relation to reduction, reuse, recycling, recovery, and residual management. And you'll be able to describe the potential for greater resource efficiency within society in terms of minimizing waste and maximizing opportunities for recovery and waste elimination. You'll be able to describe the principles of zero waste management in relation to the creation of employment opportunities and economic development in diverting waste from landfill. So there's some great positive and creative aspects in this. The second objective is to describe the application of legislative requirements for waste management. Well, what does that mean? Well, you'll know you've achieved this objective if you're able to identify the national and the local bodies charged with administering or looking after the legal requirements in terms of contact details, their legislative jurisdictions, geographical areas of responsibility, and the relevant documents produced by or available from those bodies. So critically, those are Ministry for the Environment, that's one of the national bodies, and then you've got Bay of Plenty Regional Council, Tauranga City Council, and Western Bay of Plenty District Council in this area, who have that legal requirement to manage our waste. And finally, by identifying waste management situations in a specified context, requiring reference to particular legislative requirements in terms of the individual's ability to meet the legislative requirement versus contracting external assistance. Now, these will all make sense as we go through the course. You're not expected to know or understand exactly what this is all about right now, but it's good to bear it in mind, especially as we move. So what is the course going to involve? Well, we've got some key topics. We're going to have an introduction to zero waste management. We're going to look at the waste hierarchy, the 6 R's. We're going to look at paper, aluminium, glass and plastic, how they are produced. We're going to look at landfills and clean fills and look at the difference between the two. We're going to discuss hazardous waste, a really critical topic for the environment. And we're going to look at waste legislation, which is where a lot of the power is when we want to make change. And we're going to look at waste and energy production and energy efficient buildings. And finally, we'll have a look at air quality, which is a waste that's produced in many processes. Assessments. Okay, so there are 3 assessments for this course. The first assessment is that there will be tasks, and these tasks are associated with some really cool field trips. There were 4 field trips, and there's 1 group presentation. So in total, there are 5 tasks. So each of those 5 tasks is worth 7%, and that makes up a total of 35% of your final mark. The second assessment is a waste audit, and that's going to be worth 20% of your mark. A waste audit in your household that looks at the different items of waste that you produce and which are recyclable, which are compostable, which are going to need to go to landfill. And the final assessment is the exam, which is worth 45% of the total mark. So just having a look now at those tasks. So you've got those 5 tasks. Remember we talked about the 4 field trips and 1 group presentation. Those 5 tasks are worth 7% each. They consist of 4 field trips with 1 set of questions or 1 task per trip. Those questions are in your workbook, and you can just work through the questions and fill in the answers as we're going on the field trip. And there'll be time and space to discuss the answers as well. The 5th task is to have a group presentation. That group presentation is based on a reading which we'll discuss in class. Basically, it'll be an article from the journal Waste Management, and you'll get into groups and you'll work on producing a PowerPoint presentation within your group, within each of you then presenting an aspect or a few slides from that presentation. Now those tasks, number 1 to 4, need to be emailed to me as a document by Thursday, 9th of June by 4 p.m. And the group presentations will be delivered on Monday, the 13th of June. As we mentioned, they constitute 35% of your total. So where are we going on the field trips? Okay, so first of all, we're going to go to Tamona Transfer Station. So that is the recycling centre and area out by Bayfair, by ASB Bay Park. We're going on Tuesday, 10th of May, leaving at 9 o'clock. So that's a really exciting field trip. We get to go behind the scenes and see the whole big shed where they sort the different materials that come from the waste bins. And it's a massive eye-opener, really worthwhile bringing your camera for that one, because it's somewhere that normal members of the public not usually able to access. But really interesting, really exciting to see how energized and motivated the staff are who work there. They really enjoy the work they do. They know they're making a big difference in terms of environmental management. A second field trip. Now we're going out to Tirohia Landfill, which is over in the Waikato, and that's on the 16th of May. We'll have a look and see what happens to the materials that can't be recycled. Third field trip, going out to Bayfair Shopping Centre. They've done a lot of great work in terms of recycling and sustainability at Bayfair. On a national scale, they've done exceedingly well. And we're going to investigate what they've done and how perhaps that model could be transposed and used elsewhere nationally and internationally as well. The final trip, looking to go out to a permaculture farm, which is all about how the house and its garden, its orchard, its farm can be maintained and run or set up so that it minimizes waste as well. We've got date confirmed for that one. And then finally, the group presentation. Each group is going to present one of the 5 selected readings to the class. We'll talk about that, and I'll have those readings available when we get together. There's 23 of you, I think, so we'll get into roughly 6 groups of 4 people. Each student will present a section of the PowerPoint. So not only will you work collaboratively on putting the PowerPoint together, but then when it comes to presenting the information, you'll all have 3 or 4 minutes per person to present a section of your PowerPoint to the rest of the class. Using PowerPoint, 20 minutes presentation, including roughly 5 minutes of question and answer. And that's really critical, is that after you've done your PowerPoint, you get asked by members of the rest of the class different aspects of your presentation. So that's the unrehearsed stuff. And the material will be relevant to the final exam. Okay, so the second key bit of assessment for this course is the waste audit. And that involves assessing and monitoring the waste or the resources in your household that you're putting into your compost bin or your recycling bins or your landfill bin. It'll involve analysing and presenting the results and then writing up those results as a scientific report. And we've got a format for you that we'll talk about in class about what goes into a scientific report. Things like your introduction, your methods, your results, your discussion. And this will constitute 20% of your final mark and is due on Friday, 27th of May at 4 p.m. So finally, the exam, which will include material from your lectures, your presentations, and those readings that you did for your group presentation. The exam constitutes 45% of your total final marks for this course. Some really great websites for you to get to grips with what zero waste or waste management is all about. Ministry for the Environment. This is a really useful document or website with lots of different documents on it. I've put the specific web page for you to go to. Also, the Bay of Plenty Regional Council. They're the local relevant council for this area, obviously. They have a great section on waste and recycling. Tauranga City Council has got a really good section on rubbish and recycling. And before we go to the Te Moana transfer station, it would be a great idea to have a look at their website because it discusses the transfer station and what their aims are. Western Bay District Council has a great website. At the moment, they have submissions and an opportunity for consumers and citizens like yourself to have your say on what waste management looks like for the future. So I really encourage you to go onto that and just have a look and even make a submission if you feel motivated. Also EnviroHub, which is our Bay of Plenty Environment Centre website, has got some great information, and the following ones also. So have a look through those. In particular, though, I would recommend these top ones in order of priority. There's a really good article in the New Zealand Geographic from July, August last year called Waste Not. I'd really encourage you to read that. You should be able to get copies of that either online. If you ask in the library, they'll tell you how to access that online. We're going to have guest speakers too. So we've got, not only do we have 4 field trips, but we've got 4 guest speakers. So it's going to be a really jam-packed course full of outings and guest speakers, which is great because this is the kind of subject that is constantly changing, and it's really good to talk to people in the field who are working this day in, day out. So we've got people from the councils and people from private businesses involved in trying to help with sustainability and waste management. Some of them are even previous students of environmental management who were sitting in your chairs a few years ago. So that makes it really exciting too. Where can you get more help? Well, there's lots of different places to get more help, but also do contact me, and obviously I'll be in the lectures. If you need my contact details, there they are. So expectations, as they were for other courses that you've had this year, you've probably been told already that you need to attend 90% or more of the lectures in order to be eligible for a resit of your exam. Please do ask for help if you're stuck at all. I'm a really hopeless mind reader, but I'm really willing to help if you have any problems at all. Safety and risk management, really critical on field trips, especially going around the the waste management areas like recycling centres where there's lots of broken glass and contaminated material. So really critical just to make sure you have closed toe shoes and all the right gear that I'll recommend before each field trip. And participation is so critical. That's what I was saying at the start of this PowerPoint, is that if you actively get involved in learning the material, you'll remember it so much more easily, and it'll be so much more enjoyable as well. So I'm really hoping that participation is really high. Have you got any questions? I've got my contact details up there. Is there anything that you want to know right now? Have a look on the Moodle page and just have a look for news forum items as well, which I will post items on that news forum if there's anything new that comes up in between. And if you have a moment, take a look at these short videos. So that first video is just 3 minutes and 45 seconds. It's a really short video. This one is a little bit depressing, but it sets the scene really nicely for this positive one. So this is 1 minute and 28 seconds. The first video you'll see is about some harm that's done to wildlife because of the trash that's floating in our oceans, which the wildlife digest and then try and feed to their young. But then this is a really positive story. This is the good news story, which you always have to balance the negative ones, showing how a bit of ingenuity and creativity can help solve problems. And then here's another TED Talk which is looking at zero waste as well. So I'd really encourage you to look through these films. Again, they're not that long. This last TED Talk is only 18 minutes long. The others are just a few minutes long. Really good to build on your knowledge by watching those kinds of audio visual